We are today at the James Monroe Museum in Fredericksburg, Virginia, talking about James Monroe, the fifth President of the United States. Monroe, like all men of his class, his era, were great readers, and they all had a great love of books. Monroe did not have an extensive library like Thomas Jefferson or John Adams had. He was never able to collect on that scale, but he did own and collect books. He bought books. People he knew gave him books that they wrote. Jefferson gave him a copy of Notes on Virginia. William Wilberforce gave him the books that he was writing on anti-slavery, these sorts of things. And then he would buy books. He was interested. Most of his books were on, as one would expect, law, government, history, these sorts of things, in various language, not just English, but in French, which was the diplomatic language. So a lot of books on international law were written in French. Had those books in Spanish, German. So it was really this sort of international library that he collected. But like his contemporaries, he was also interested in writing books and was not very good at it, was not successful. He started in his retirement, he started working on an autobiography that he never finished, and then he started writing on this other analytical political thing in which he wanted to explain why the United States was succeeding as a republic when republics in history had always failed, going back to classical Greece and Rome, and sort of comparing those republics to the U.S. Republic. And it just, he never finished it. It has since been published, but it really wasn't a successful book. But what we have here is when Monroe returned from his diplomatic mission to France in the 1790s, right when he left, France broke relations with the United States. And Monroe, being a Jeffersonian and being a diplomat under a Federalist administration, the Federalist administration blamed him for the break in relations. They said that he bungled the mission, which you hear quite a bit. This interpretation still gets some currency, although it's wrong. And Monroe responded to this by publishing a book that argued that it was the policies of the Washington and Adams administration that caused the break with France. It wasn't anything he did, that he had actually put off the break for the 4 years that he was in Paris. So he wrote this like a 65-page essay explaining what went on, and then he published another 200 pages of documents defending what he had done and trying to document and to show that it really wasn't his fault that this had happened, that it was administration policy. And the book received a fair amount of currency when it first came out, of course, because it was something that was still being debated, and it was current. And after a couple of years, it lost its currency because it was no longer really a public issue anymore. We began working on papers of James Monroe in 1989, and the first step in doing a project like this is, of course, to know how many documents there are, what they are. And there were some we knew about. There's a collection of Monroe's papers at Library of Congress. There's another major collection at New York Public Library. There's a collection here at the Monroe Museum. There's various others around. We knew there would be a lot in the National Archives, of course, because of his long employment with the national government. We knew because he had been governor, had been an office holder in Virginia, there would be papers in the state archives as well. So there's these obvious sorts of places. But we did a survey. We printed up these little cards that we sent around to libraries around the country, any place that would possibly have manuscript collections, and asked, do you have any Monroe documents? Do you have a lot? Do you have a few? However many? And we had a fairly good response to that. Once we had that core, we then began to research the documents and prepare them for publication. And there are a number of projects like this. There's Jefferson Papers, Madison Papers. The Abraham Lincoln Papers have been in the news a lot recently. Washington Post has been giving them coverage. So there's these sorts of projects going on. The big projects that started in the 1950s, Washington Papers, Jefferson Papers, Madison Papers, are publishing everything they can find, letters to, from, and just they're doing this comprehensive project to do these comprehensive editions of the papers. So the Jefferson Papers is trying to publish everything they can find relating to Jefferson. These are multi-generational projects. Jefferson Papers started in 1950, and they'll go for another 25, 30 years probably. When we came along and started Monroe Papers, there was no one who was willing to undertake, who was going to pay for this sort of undertaking. So we're doing a more selected edition where we're going through Monroe's papers and we're pulling out the documents that we consider critical to telling Monroe's story. And those are the ones we're publishing. So we'll do approximately 10 volumes, which will be about 6,500, 7,000 documents out of this 40,000. What we're really aiming at in the work we're doing on publishing Monroe's papers is how does this one individual, the choices he makes, the decisions he makes, how does that influence the formation of the country?